Welcome to our webinar, Navigating Digital Transformation. My name is Anya MacDonald. I'm the Marketing and Brand Manager at Olive. We're so excited to have you on our webinar. We would love if you would follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Tariq, and he's going to bring you through our webinar, Navigating Digital Transformation.
Oh, thank you, Anya. First, let me start by introducing myself. My name is Tariq Chaudhry, and I am the Director of Business Transformation at Olive. Why am I the one to speak with you today? Well, beyond an educational background in technology and operations management, being a certified PMP and a business process management professional, I've been part of technology evaluations for my whole career. My career really started as a business analyst, moving up to a senior BA as companies such as Alberta Health, BC Ferries, BC Pension, eventually working my way up to PM and then program manager for business transformation at A&W Food Services, which is, for those of you that don't know, second largest fast food chain in Canada, right behind McDonald's. And then finally joining Olive as director of business transformation. I've done other things outside of this, but I don't think stories about working in an Alberta oil rig in -50 is going to be useful to this conversation I'm going to have. So we'll just stick to what is up on the slides here. With that being said, let's get right into it. What are we going to talk about today? First thing we're going to talk about is digital transformation. What does it all mean? And get alignment on that as we go through this. We're going to talk about three of the most common approaches, and we've tried to make it a little fun for you. So we've added some emojis and we've added avatars and personalities to each one of these approaches, one being the dictators, the ninjas, and then we'll talk about the traditionalists. And we will also talk about some examples of why digital transformation fails and what happens when you get it right. And then we'll give you a brief demo on all of itself. Well, first things first is digital transformation. What does it mean? Moving into digital transformation, the first thing I want to talk about is we need to align on what we actually mean by digital transformation. You see often that business transformation and digital transformation is often confused, and these terms are used interchangeably. So let's set the record right. Okay. First, business transformation is looking at your business processes first to identify inefficiencies and redundancies within your business, optimizing and changing those processes to deliver the intended business outcome. Often this will include some aspect of technology, but it doesn't always not always necessary. I can do business transformation projects without the need for tech to improve it further. For example, changes to an ordering process. To find more efficient ways to do it, I could move printers closer to eliminate time waste due to unnecessary movement. This is an example of business transformation. I didn't need any technology to do that, just changing the process slightly to identify efficiencies. Digital transformation itself is the process of finding and implementing tools that will increase an organization's speed, agility, and data-driven decision-making capabilities, among other things, obviously. But usually that's the realm of digital transformation. And usually some aspects of business transformation are included in each digital transformation initiative. For example, a new technology usually requires some change to the current process, or maybe a new technical skill set to take full advantage of the new technology. Much like continuous improvement, digital transformation is a never ending journey. But that doesn't mean you have to do it on foot or blindly follow others. There is an easier mode of transportation. But first, let's take a look at how it's done today. So what we're going to first start talking about is the very first thing, which is the dictator. I'm sure most of you are laughing at the image, but if you've been involved in technology projects, you can probably put a different face to who, in your experience, has used this approach. These type of leaders will approach a project at 10,000 or even 30,000 feet. And by that, I mean they have a limited knowledge of the stakeholder needs or the actual detailed business process. They are confident, they are self-assured, and based on a basic understanding of the high-level business needs, they offer up solutions. This may mean direct 2 demos or a few solutions to explore further, or even implementing a single solution that is dictated by them, for lack of a better word. Whether they're executives or consultants, they're basing their suggestions on past experience. And let's be honest, you've hired them for their experience. But my point here is, if experience matters, then shouldn't we be learning from the countless failed IT implementations that one size doesn't fit all? Or even worse, buying a solution that solves the wrong problem can end up crippling the growth of an organization. From my perspective, the key concerns with this type of approach is you're limiting your options right out of the box. You have the whole world in front of you, but you're saying, I'm going to find a solution in this tiny little box. It must meet my needs. And if industry leaders were the best at everything, there would be no such term as best of breed, right? Makes sense. The other concern with this approach is limited stakeholder engagement. The reason for that is simple. The idea behind limiting the number of people you talk to is so that you can make decisions faster. If you don't need to talk to as many people, you don't have to gather as much requirements, you don't have to take so many things into consideration. But the problem with that is, if you don't know what the other person's needs are, then how can you solve for them, right? And the last thing I want to point out that is, from my perspective, a key concern with this approach is personal bias towards their own objective or needs. For example, if you're using a consultant for this approach, they're going to recommend solutions most likely that they've worked with in the past, or they have experience implementing, right? If you're a consultant, you wouldn't necessarily bring me solution X saying, hey, this is what's going to fit you the best, but I have no experience with it. I have never worked with it. And you're not going to be so inclined to deliver that solution. From the other perspective, if I'm an IT leader and my internal objective is to simplify the tech stack, I'm not going to be so inclined to include new solutions in the potential pool of options, because that is going to take away from my objective of simplifying the IT stack. But what does that all really mean in terms of timelines? Let's take a look at uh, the timeline. This timeline, I want to first preface, is only being used to make a point. It's not actual timelines. IT projects vary wildly in how long they can take. But the key takeaway from this is simple. The intention of this type of approach is to make decisions faster so that you can deliver business value sooner. But that is where the problem lies itself, right? You may be able to make decisions faster, but it's a long way from actually delivering business value. And sometimes that destination is never reached. After vendor selection, as you can see on the chart here, after vendor selection, the broader stakeholder group is involved. And when they get involved, that's when Pandora's box is actually open. During implementation, stakeholder needs that were never discussed or considered as part of the evaluation surface. And this is when the implementation team starts to scramble. They start to figure out workarounds, customizations, which, by the way, are additional costs, or even worse, they make promises to resolve the issue later while the business continues to use legacy systems. Not ideal, obviously. Look, implementations can fail for so many different reasons, but one most often overlooked is poor change management. When stakeholders start to see that their needs were never considered, and you now have people who are pushing against this solution, you want stakeholders to be promoters of this new solution, but you're turning them into detractors, which will ultimately lead to poor user adoption and eventual failure of the solution. But the good news is there is a way to eliminate this risk. But first, I want to include a note here. Not all projects that use this approach fail. I'm only saying that you're adding unnecessary risk of failure and additional unplanned costs when using this approach. Hope that makes sense. With that being said, let's turn our attention to the next persona on our list, which is the ninja or shadow IT. I don't know about you guys, but I loved playing ninja when I was younger. And why not? They were quick, efficient, did their work in secret. They were cool, at least from my perspective. And that's exactly what we're talking about here: shadow IT. These folks are trying to get stuff done by finding tools that work for them. Either the new tool is able to deliver a greater efficiency or easier user experience. But no matter what the underlying reason is behind this approach, it ends up bypassing IT protocols, right? From the user perspective, IT or organizational oversight and stringent governance policies are often designed to protect the organization and not necessarily designed to address the challenges of the user at the workspace. And if that's the case, there's a bigger issue of company culture or organizational structure, which we could have a whole webinar about it on itself. But sticking to the subject topic at hand, where let's take a look at what the timelines themselves show us when you look at the Ninja. As you can see, the approach initially looks very efficient, right? Limited engagement, discovery, requirements analysis, and a quick implementation. Doing what needs to be done in order to deliver business value. Sounds great, but we come back to the same issue as the dictator: limited stakeholder engagement. Because in this approach, the wider stakeholder needs were never considered, right, by the shadow team or user. Not having insight at the organizational level tends to lead to the creation of data silos or redundant systems, or really bad, which is introduce unnecessary cybersecurity risks, right? Not to mention ongoing support and maintenance requirements, which requires you to either partner with an external party, which introduces additional costs again and complexity, or rely on internal IT. And when it comes to relying on internal IT, the same principle of change management apply here. IT stakeholders realized that they were never consulted, and none of their requirements were ever considered in part of the selection process. So they push back and they are less inclined to actually support your decision, especially when it involves more work for them. Human nature. I don't want to do something you never asked me about, right? Basically, while efficient in the short term, what I'm trying to say here is that this type of approach leads to failure in the long term due to reasons such as redundancies, like solutions are going to be shelved or decommissioned in favor of a solution that works and integrates better at an organizational level. So even though for the short term you may have this solution, in the long term it most likely will get shelved. Loss of champions. What happens a lot of times is the original champion or decision makers leave the team or the company, and no one recalls why this solution was even being used or brought in, and it naturally comes to an end. Or last part, not having internal product knowledge, right? Not having internal expertise to support and maintain this product. All of these reasons can lead to that. Um, One thing I do want to say is, from my perspective, I can definitely understand why this approach is taken. When the users either feel like they're being unheard, or the organizational culture doesn't support innovation, or the process itself is such a nightmare. It's full of red tape, such as documentations and unnecessary approvals over approvals, right? Again, I'm not saying that this approach always fails or can't deliver business value. On the contrary, I think an agile approach to solution selection should be implemented, but not at the cost of ignoring organizational needs and strategic objectives. And I'll show you how to do that in a few minutes here. But before we do that, let's move to the next and final contestant on our list, which is the traditionalist, right? This approach is something a lot of people are familiar with. The traditional waterfall hybrid approach to technology projects. This digital transformation journey starts at the organizational level, meaning top down. Everyone agrees to a strategic direction that the organization is heading, and then determines what work needs to be done in order to achieve those objectives. Most of the time, they end up prioritizing technology projects that will deliver the largest measurable results towards that objective. In this approach, there is a process that requires documentation, stakeholder engagement, approvals throughout the process to ensure alignment across the organization, reducing the risks discussed in some of the other approaches that we just finished discussing. But on the flip side, this approach has its own risks, time being one of the biggest concerns, right? There is usually an immediate pain in the business, and there's known benefits of change, which always puts a sense of urgency behind these types of projects. But this approach in itself takes the longest time, but it also reduces risk. So there is a fine line, right? The more planning that you do, the less risk that you have. But that also requires time. So how do you juggle the both? The other risk associated with this approach is resource. It is very resource intensive. Organizations will often allocate a percentage of resource to this approach, meaning there is a larger opportunity cost associated with this approach when compared to some of the other approaches that we discussed. The last concern that you should keep in mind when it comes to this approach is stakeholder burnout. This is a combination of time and resource allocation, right? As the timelines drag on, due to endless meetings required to document the process, gather requirements, ranking and prioritization, evaluations and demos, etc., with no end in sight, the stakeholders start to burn out. They lose interest and they're no longer productive members of the project team and no longer vested in the success of the project because their work continues to pile up as their work on the project continues to increase as well, right? With all of this said, in my opinion, the steps followed in this process are the right approach to digital transformation and overall technology projects. But why do I say that? Let's take a look at the timelines here. Again, the steps outlined are the best way to reduce risks associated with technology projects. But since there's more process, documentation, and oversight in this approach, it leads to longer timelines. And that is its Achilles heel, right? The sheer amount of time it takes before you have selected a solution and started to implement it. But history teaches us anything, it teaches us that planning and due diligence should not be disregarded for to save time. Upfront effort will save you countless hours, money, and painful workarounds, customizations, and eliminate most of the risks associated with selecting and implementing new technologies. At this point, you're probably asking, how do I follow this process but make it more agile like the ninja and have the confidence of the dictator? Well, I promise by the end of this webinar, I will answer that question. But first, let's take a look at some of the examples of why digital transformation efforts fail within organizations. This is a stat, right? And there's a link to the actual article underneath, but it is mind blowing to think that 70% of technology projects fail for many of the reasons we've already discussed. Including red tape. There's either too much documentation, process, and approvals, or not enough that leave you open to risks of failure. There's not enough time or resources allocated. Uh, you've only looked at a few vendors, so you've put yourself in a box, or you've only looked at one and said, "Hey, let's see how we can make this work." Right? Change management, a huge aspect of a reason to why projects fail. Delivering a solution to a user without ever getting input from the user themselves, asking them what they need, right? Poor communication and misalignment leads to lower user adoption and overall failure. All of these can lead to solving the wrong problem or getting the wrong tech. But from my perspective, the biggest reason for failure is simple: poor stakeholder engagement. When you look at the three approaches that we talked about, stakeholder engagement is either end of the spectrum, right? The traditionalist is going to include the most amount of stakeholders, but then there's a drawback on the time, right? The more people you speak to, the more time you require. Of course, the dictator will be the minimal, but that means misunderstood or completely missed requirements. And the ninja is only concerned with themselves, right? They are only concerned with their department and their needs. All of these reasons, like I said, or combine on their own or combine can lead to project failure. But let's take a look at what happens in the real world when projects actually fail as an example. So what you see here is an example of a very famous project out of the 2000s that Nike did. It was an implementation for their supply chain management solution. What they wanted, what they desired was a planning demand planning engine that would predict production. It ended up predicting only a few orders for Air Jordans compared to Air Garnets, which ended up costing $100 million of lost sales, 20% dip in their stock price, and countless lawsuits. But the reason it happened is because of poor stakeholder engagement. The users of the product itself and their needs were never considered. The planners, nobody talked to the planners to figure out, hey, this is what we're building, does this meet your needs, and additionally, this is how to use the new product. It's a real life example that this happened. Had they engaged the broader stakeholder group, they may have also identified all of these additional integration requirements that were never addressed in the first place. And that is why stakeholder engagement and collaboration is so important. So, switching from this, let's take a look at what happens when you do it right. Okay. The first example that you see here is for A&W. Yeah, out of my real life example. We wanted to implement a new BI tool and A&W is quite a large organization, billion dollar organization. The idea was simple. We had 24 different systems that needed to be replaced in order to reduce our manual effort and increase productivity. The stakeholders engaged across 7 teams were 150 plus, and the results were astounding. Over 10,000 plus hours of manual effort eliminated, 99% user adoption, all within 3 months. Now, they are not unique by any means. Here's another example where Freddy's was looking to implement a new POS system across 380 locations, and 20 plus stakeholders were included in this project. And the desire was to reduce cost of ownership. They had multiple legacy systems, data silos, duplications of data, and multiple integrations needed. What they ended up with was a new POS, faster time to implement a new solution, broad consensus with the team and third parties, and a clear, provable ROI. And if I was you, I'd be asking, okay, finally, tell us how they did it, right? Well, how you do it is simple. You use the right tech with the right way to get you to utopia. What is the right tech? That is Olive. Olive is an end-to-end digital transformation platform used to streamline your technology evaluations, collaborate across your whole organization, build requirements using libraries or yourself, and finding solutions that transform your business. And what is the right process? The right way is the Olive process, which takes the right steps but makes them more agile. Olive platform plus Olive process gives you the speed of the ninja with the thoroughness of the traditionalist, so you can have the confidence of the dictator when making the decisions. All of this leads to delivering measurable business value sooner. I think at this point, it may be a good time to actually give you a sneak preview of the platform itself. So we're going to switch into a demo here quick in a second, if you bear with me. So when you log into Olive, you are invited into the portfolio level dashboard. So this is where you can build out your whole strategy. You can create all the initiatives that you want to work on. You can put them into planning and move them along the process as you see fit. As you get approvals, you move them from on hold into active, etc. You can quickly go into see all of the details about the projects with the slide out menu, see what the description is, who's working on it, what the status is. One thing I do want to call out quickly here is the ability to clone projects. This allows you at an organizational level to create templated projects with your IT or cybersecurity requirements included out of the gates with every single one of the projects, eliminating the need to include IT every single time. But that being said, you can go into the project details, and this is where you're going to do your build understanding. This project overview page captures all of the project details, current state, benefits, evaluations, etc., including all of your project timelines. and vendor some statistics on vendor engagement, and a way to communicate with vendors easily as well. You can remember I was talking about stakeholder engagement and why it's so important. Well, Olive provides you the tools to do that using our surveys that you can easily build and share and capture requirements from a broad user group without ever having to have conversations or endless meetings with them. You can share the surveys via link. We provide you an analytics dashboard to see what the responses were, who responded, and when they responded. All of this information is stored for you against the project level. So it's one central location to manage everything to do with the project and allow you to collaborate with as many stakeholders as you need. You can invite stakeholders, as you can see quite easily here, either sharing a link or putting in their email addresses. I do want to spend some time on the requirements, which are obviously a very important part of doing evaluations. You can simply enter in your requirements here. You can actually compare the responses of the various stakeholders so that you can drive towards alignment. You can flag items for review and have those conversations with the team at a broader level to make sure that the right requirement is captured and the right need is prioritized as it should be. If you want, you can also use the requirements libraries provided out of the box with Olive. For example, if I was to look for a CRM, I can go and see all of the various requirements that have been used by other customers that may be important for you in your CRM project, and you may want to add into your project directly using the requirements libraries. The cool thing with Olive here is once you've built it all out, you can all invite vendors right up front. As soon as you have your project details, you can invite vendors to collaborate with you to build out your project and your requirements. And then you can compare those vendors side by side to see who's going to be a good fit to your needs. You have detailed reporting here to see if they're an overall match, how they do in the various categories that you may have assigned. And you can further drill down to see where each vendor is a match, mismatch, or otherwise. And further to that, you can actually open these up to see what are the responses from the vendors so that you can identify items that may need demo, or you may want may want to have further conversations with them, and you can put them in here directly. The last thing I want to talk about on the comparison page is actually being able to view beyond just category, beyond requirements, and into use cases as well. So, for example, if you've identified blockers, which we call critical requirements, and you say these are critical requirements for my organization, you can now view which vendors side by side meet those critical requirements before you go into the other requirements. So here I can see TIPCO is 100% match to my critical requirements, but IBM is only an 86% match, whereas in TIPCO is an overall match at 80%. So the idea being reducing and identifying those risks. So you know what you're getting into and where the functionality will be lacking so that you can plan for it accordingly. So if I was to go into the solutions page, I can drill deeper into the solutions. Here, you'll be invited into the profile page of IBM where they want to share information about themselves, any attachments, who are the people that are working on this opportunity for you. And then, of course, the responses so that you can go through each one of these individual responses and see what IBM said and provide your input if you think it is a good match or not. And additionally, identify items for demos. So when you're going into the demo, you have a tailored shortlist of items that you're going to talk about. You can additionally, we provide you the functionality, score their rank their functionality. So if two vendors both say they provide you that functionality, one is an easy one-click solution. The other one requires you to jump through hoops to get to the end result. You can rank them accordingly. So one vendor you may say is a 5 out of 5, while the other one may be a 0. All of this is taken into account into the overall match. So you have a clear line of sight in seeing what was a good match before the demos, what is a good match after the demos, and all of your stakeholders have provided input so that you can go into your decision with eyes open and be able to quickly identify all of those things that IBM as a solution will not be able to provide you in this particular project. So you know these two these two functionality will not be there. Again, eliminating the risk associated with technology selection through collaboration and an all-in-one platform.
If you're still with us, thanks so much for watching. And if you have any questions about the Olive platform or navigating digital transformation, please just drop your questions and comments in the comments below. And don't forget to follow us across all of our channels. Thanks so much.